Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of At Home with Holmes. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Maddie, for those hand gestures. You'll never guess who we have coming up for you in this episode, except that's exactly what you can do because you saw the thumbnail, but not the point. This is a man of metaphor, and to become a man or woman of metaphor, you have to immerse yourself in the beauty of nature. And so if you want to be this thing, then you better check out our sponsor at Cabin on the Coulee Farm.
That is cotc.ca. It is a glamp site business here in central Alberta, and it's rated the #1 farm stay in Canada, according to TripAdvisor. That is some good advice. We advise you to take this trip, as our family does annually now, because that is how we become men and women of metaphor. So we are in vacation season. You can book any 3 of these glamp sites anywhere from May to November each year.
Yep, and if you see on the website, it'll give you your 3 selections. So we start with the Cabin, which holds 6 guests, 3 bedrooms, and 4 beds. Then we have the Coulee Yurt, which holds 5 guests, 3 bedrooms, and 3 beds. And then the Grouse House, which is 4 guests, 1 bedroom, and 2 beds. And all of the pictures are online. So go on their website, cotc.ca. And then if you want to learn a little bit more of the inner workings and updates of this business, this family, then check out Cabin on the Coulee Farm. You'll scroll down and you'll see all sorts of, oh, look at that. Oh, who are these lovely people? Oh, you'll see that Eric, actually the owner of this business, interviewed Maddie and I when we saw each other at the Cornerstone Farm. And so, speaking of Cornerstone Farm, that's exactly where we met today's guest, Neil Oliver.
And if you just so happen to appreciate the beautiful blue garments that these 2 lovely ladies happen to be wearing alongside our man of metaphor here, you can become blue and beautiful like us. If you go to our Buy Me a Coffee page, except don't buy us a coffee, buy us a matcha. 1, 3, 5, you may pick, because we like matcha.
I like matcha.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And then if you want a jersey, you can see the shop tab on the far right, so you'll click that, and then that's where you can get your own blue, beautiful jersey. It'll be a pop-up once you pay, buy 1, 3, however many for your family, and then the pop-up will ask for your size, so I know what to send you.
Yeah, so spread the patriotic message, that this is not just about Alberta. Neil and his ancestors have been fighting tyranny for a long time. So support people like us and like Cabin on the Coulee Farm. And we appreciate you guys listening to this message, and we've had way too much fun with it. So without further ado, let's get on with the episode.
Can I just check all of your names?
Yeah.
I know Madison, and
Macy.
Mike.
Macy, Mike. Yeah,
Eminem.
yeah.
And you are?
Call me anything you want.
Just don't call me
Call me
late.
Neil.
Alrighty, everybody. This is another episode of Whose Battlefield Are We On? This is technically part 6. And today we are absolutely honored to have Neil Oliver. And Neil Oliver has been through the thick of it. And he is a very prime example with a story kind of like our families, that he had to do a lot of axiom changing once he started digging into what was going on in the world. And COVID happened to be one of the things for him, like our family, that just put an entirely new narrative, and it gave cause to a whole new realm of research and thinking that had to be done. And so, again, to share from somebody that is much more articulate than we are, how you can start thinking about things and adapting when information comes your way that you didn't exactly prepare yourself for, or pundits that maybe you were listening to that you once thought, had all the answers, and then suddenly a topic just comes in and they are taking a completely new route that you did not expect, and you find yourself thinking, okay, can I not rely on this source anymore? And that's really unsettling. You feel like the rug's been pulled under you. You kind of feel like you're being betrayed. And I feel there's a lot of that going on. People find themselves, especially with, the modern times and all the events that are going on, as things get more confusing, people want to close down and narrow their range of who they have to listen to the people they trust the most. And that's still becoming very difficult for people. So we believing Neil Oliver does a very good job trying to keep his mind open, and we are going to bring that to you. As you know, our family tries to do the exact same thing. We've told you our biases ahead of time so we can be an open book. So that's kind of why we believe he's a fantastic voice for this series. Dad, for the context?
Yeah, so as always, we always try to let the people that are viewers of this channel, we're in Alberta, we have an independence movement going on, and this is challenging axioms as well. So we're hoping that through conversation with someone like Neil Oliver, who can communicate his story and some of the key things that changed for him and what were the consequences of having to change your mind or look at the world under a different light. And then also the struggle that many people face with when they do have that axiom changed. Black pilling is one of the stages of the transition, of the process. And so like in our family, we often say, like the left hemisphere needs to have its say, but you can't stay there. So that's what we would like to offer, hopefully, in this conversation. And that, thank you very much, Neil, for being with us. And that's the opening question is the consequences that you've had to face as an individual, a pleb like ourselves, that got the rug pulled, as Maddie had said, and then what has been the axioms that you once stood on and felt very confident in, and then clearly that shifted, and then that process for you to where you are now.
I'm delighted to be with you. Thanks for inviting me. I was fascinated to spend some time, a very little bit of time in Alberta, in Calgary, a part of the world that I had not previously visited, and I was very strongly affected by how passionately held is the intention to strike out for an independent Alberta. I was aware of that as an idea. But to come face to face with it, I was surprised by the intensity of feeling. So that was educational for me. The consequences. It's hard to enumerate them. Hard to list the consequences. I was living one life, a life of before. BC, before COVID. I broadly trusted the institutions. I wasn't a political person, so I didn't really particularly care what political party was, had a majority in government, because broadly speaking, I just assumed that governments were there to look after us, regardless. Keep the lights on, make sure the rubbish bins were emptied, make sure there were paved roads and food in the supermarkets. I didn't really think beyond it. Also, I think it does come down to trust. I trusted. I just assumed that other people were taking care of me and had my best interests at heart. And when I look back on that now, I think how naive I was. But so in I suppose shrugging off that trust, or arguably I suppose having it ripped from me, everything has changed. So the consequences for me of going through the last few years have been everything outside of my family relationships. Everything has changed. I don't do what I used to do, for income, really. I don't. Almost everyone. I'm only using all. I mean, I could almost say everyone, but let's say almost everyone that I knew before. I don't talk to them anymore, or they don't talk to me. I've lost all of those relationships and friendships. I've been blocked on social media by people that I've had known for decades. All the associations that I had. I was involved in charities. I was a spokesperson for this and that. I was a president of the National Trust for Scotland. I had a column in a newspaper. I had an agent who represented me professionally. I was a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. I'm none of those things now. All of those things went from me, turned away from me. So it's been a total change. But I suppose, when you talk about, I can sum it all up, really. I no longer trust. Now, you could say that's a very negative, a sort of nihilistic position to have taken. But maybe I can clarify it based on how you want to interrogate that statement. But what I mean is that I think it's too much of a burden to put on any other person, or even an institution or an entity, for me to trust them. That's not something I should ask of others, really. Apart from a very small number, very close to my heart, I shouldn't really be trusting. It's a responsibility that I shouldn't ask others to take on my behalf. So now my outlook in relation to the world and to events is that I just trust myself. I ask it of myself, that I pay attention, that I look at actions rather than listening to words from other people, and I take responsibility for myself. So I would say that encapsulates, I think, fundamentally the way in which my relationship with the wider world has been changed.
I'm curious on, it's funny you say you trust yourself. Knowing the hemisphere work as my family does, I can recall when me and Macy were a little bit younger, and we were trying to figure out, just the trepidations and the normal tumultuous times of teenage angst. Macy had a spout where she didn't feel like she could trust her own mind, and this was partly because she hadn't built good habits yet. So she was saying, how do I build these good habits? Because I feel like my brain kind of goes in areas, maybe like Dad said, a black pill, or maybe it just jumps to conclusions too quickly. Maybe we're a bit too emotional. And people today can get, because we're in a very left hemisphere like society, we can get positivity biases too. Maybe some people trust themselves, not realizing they haven't done the work yet. So maybe there's research in this area. For example, here in Alberta, people think they can trust what the Canadian identity was without having looked into any of the history. And so how does that look for you, trusting yourself? Did that happen naturally, or did that take work? Did you have to get mental habits of research and contextual thinking first? How did you get here now?
I think it's probably simpler than that. You mentioned, I think you said a few minutes ago that I certainly tried to be more open-minded, which is, I would prefer not to think that I was close-minded before, but I don't think I was mindful. I don't think I was paying attention. I think that whole thing about wakening up was very opposite for me. I do feel as if I was just in a state of quiet slumber for most of my life. I wasn't awake. I wasn't watching. And so now, yes, I like to think of myself as being open-minded, but in the same way that I like to think of the difference between having eyes open or eyes closed. And you talk about doing the work, you talk about, left hemisphere rather than right hemisphere. I just try to watch what's happening, rather than expecting to be handed answers, methods, points of view, opinions about anything from the outside. I just try to be aware of the totality of everything that's going on, because I have been, and to some extent continue to be, so disappointed by so many people across the board that I'm determined not to have that experience again. So I don't expect. One of my approaches is that I listen to people. I watch what they're doing, and I judge that moment by moment or day by day. And I'm certainly not expecting that just because someone impresses me by their actions or words or behaviour today, I'm not assuming or expecting that they'll do the same trick for me tomorrow or next week. I think that's too much to ask. So I'm determined that I won't be let down again in that way, which was a consequence of me thinking, oh, well, that person thinks the same as me about that, or seems to be a like-minded person. We agree on that. I was allowing myself to think, well, they'll probably agree with me about possibly everything else. And that was just silly by me. There was no logical basis for me operating like that. So, for example, there's a lot of people who during the COVID debacle, appeared in my line of sight and were saying the same things as me. And I thought, great, there's my new tribe. I will be a member of that tribe. But subsequently, as things moved on and other matters and other issues, as well as and in addition to COVID, came into view, and lo and behold, they didn't. They didn't take the same stance as me on those new things, whatever the war in Ukraine or climate crisis or genocide in Gaza or whatever. They took a different position, and I was desperately disappointed again by members of what I had thought were going to be my new tribe forever. But then I checked myself again, and I thought, well, why? Why would I have that expectation? Why would I make that assumption that just because somebody agreed with me that face masks and and almost mandated medical procedures and lockdowns, just because they agreed with me that was wrong, why would I predict that they would have all the same opinions as me going forward? So it's a continual learning process. So in many ways, my life's become a lot simpler. That I think I mentioned it in the room in Calgary. I said, if you just tell the truth, you don't need to remember anything. I just try to pay attention to what's happening in front of me, and I watch what people are doing. I listen to what they're saying. And I just take that in the moment and decide, what my perspective is on what they are saying and doing. Rather than trying to fit anything into some kind of ideology or worldview. I'm not trying to have a model that I can fit things into in expectation of, answers. I'm not trying to predict or divine the future anymore in a way that I think I did. I used to think, well, if they think that, if I agree with them today, I'll agree with them tomorrow. I don't think like that anymore. So in many ways, my life and my view of the world has become much simpler. I'm just taking it as it comes without any expectation at all.
That's funny. I guess we could have called the series Changing Assumptions instead of Changing Axioms. But the thing with assumptions is that we've heard, some people don't know that they're assuming, just like you said. Changing axioms kind of implies that, there's, work that I can do to this thing. But sometimes people don't know that they are making that assumption that clearly we're going to be on the same page. They're projecting their thoughts and their perspective onto the person in front of them, thinking that, they're a static person and their narrative will never change, as if your own narrative would never change.
Well, it reminds me of...
Yeah, I mean, when I met Sean, I had Sean Newman was a completely new person to me. I stumbled, as I have with so many others in the last 5 or 6 years, we stumbled into one another's paths. And for the hour or so when I was on the podcast, I was cheered by how much we sort of chimed with one another. We agreed with a lot of things in common. And then I travelled out to Alberta and met up with John along with lots of other people. And in that couple of days with him, I heard him say things that I didn't actually agree with. Right now, in the past, my previous incarnation, I'm only taking Sean as a single example. I might have been, felt, oh no, I don't 100% agree. But why would I ever have? I continue to have a lot of opinions and ideas in common with him. But when he says, as our relationship, as it were, has developed, and he has said some things that they're not my point of view. But it doesn't bother me. I don't need the people that I'm listening to be 100% on the same page as me 100% of the time. And so that has, if you see what I mean as an example, that's part of why it's become easier for me because I don't make assumptions. Oh, well, because Sean and I agreed for the hour that I was on his podcast, automatically he and I will agree about everything forever now. And I don't think that. And it makes my relationship with people a lot easier because I'm ready to be, oh, I think that. I don't think that.
I think my sister and I were having breakfast with our brother, and he mentioned something because he used to work in AHS, which is basically like nurses and doctors. And in that crowd, it can be very, I guess, left leaning, if you will. But he said that it's funny, most people, when we think of COVID as the prime example, they do as you said, which is they live in a zone of approximate assumptions, and then they just are kind of like cruising with each other, and there's a gap and they don't even realize it. And then sometimes when something pressing comes up like COVID, and it kind of exposes a bit of something else, some different shift in values that they never even asked each other if they had these values, or if like right, then it can either go like one of two ways. It's like they either feel like there's no reconciling, or there's, as you're saying, well, just because there's a difference doesn't mean that, if anything, we shouldn't have expected that there wasn't going to be a difference. And then we can move through that. And I think that for some people, they have almost like, for me, when we were alluding to like the young teenage angst, is you come forward with kind of like, well, at first for me, wasn't really sure where I was supposed to stand in a lot of things. And that's, I think, something that can be frustrating for individual people, is the listening to all the different perspectives and trying to take a look at what's going on. They're like, I just don't know where I stand. And I think a key thing that you're alluding to here is that time and patience. And so sometimes it was an example even in the book Master and His Emissary, where we were learning about the hemisphere work, but the example was more, I guess, enlightening to me. And it was that you can have children in a classroom and you can give them a math equation about like there's this many sheep, and so what age is the shepherd? And there were some children that were answering based on incomplete knowledge of like, well, I can't determine the age of the shepherd based on how many sheep he owns. But there's one kid that's like, I need more context. Like, I just need more. And I think that is something that resonates when we're trying to, especially people in the communities that we're in, and luckily that we don't always all agree on, because if there's no point in having two of you, like if there were equal, then why is there a difference at all? Like that would be the question. And so I like the fact that it's like you have to try, and just it's okay to not be sure. It's okay to be gathering more context.
You need differences, I think. Because if everyone is just pulling in one direction, if you've got a vehicle on a road, and everyone's pulling the wheel in the same direction, you'll go off the road. You need approximately half people pulling in the other direction to maintain the tension that keeps the thing moving straight. Or you could say like a big top, a circus tent with a central pole and the canvas over the top, and all the ropes pulling like in 12 positions around the circumference. It's the tension that gives the thing shape. If all the pull is just on one rope, you'll have no structure. The whole thing will just fall over. And so in a relationship between a couple of people, or between 10 people, or a city, or whatever, or a nation, it is the tension of the different opinions that gives the thing a structure at all. So you needn't be worried about. In fact, on the contrary, if everyone agrees with you, you're looking at disaster, because you'll all just pull off in one direction, and you'll end up in the ditch, or the tent will collapse. It's being pulled constantly by all of the other directions that gives the thing any sort of form. So I don't worry about it. I think why was I looking all the time in the past for people that I assumed 100% agreed with me about 100% of everything. That's what's in it for me? I already know everything they think. Why would I bother speaking to them?
That's true, Dad. He alluded to, he's still alluding to people, you agreeing with them all the time, and then that shift once you realize, oh, there's a position here that they're taking that I didn't see coming, or that I don't resonate with anymore. Some people might feel the inclination then to throw the baby out with the bathwater, completely discard them because of potentially that betrayal feeling. And I know that with our journey, and Dad, maybe you can talk to that, with the IDW is where we started. We were listening to Peterson, we were listening to Ben Shapiro, we were listening to Larry Elder, we were listening to Gad Saad, and our journey moved. And because of some of the stuff that went on with COVID and the world, and then also as we learned about new people, then we would pick up somebody like Neil Oliver and went, he's got maybe a bit more well-rounded of a narrative and a strategy to look at the world. And so you start kind of picking off or getting rid of people that maybe were in the background. But that process isn't clean for everybody who hasn't yet.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's not. And I think one of the things that's been intriguing about this journey, and maybe Neil, you'll be able to help. I'll add just a little bit of context. We've had several guests on now that we've been honored to have. And there's a disadvantage for the guest that is an advantage for, say, someone like myself who has hundreds of hours of listening to their work or reading all their literature and or both. And one of the reasons for that is that I had to become an information forager, knowing that I didn't have the relevant information to navigate the really tough circumstances in my family. We paid a price, like many, for choosing not to have a medical procedure. And then, of course, came all the ostracization. And in those early stages, we came across the World Council for Health, which I know that you're familiar with because you spoke at one of their Better Way conferences. That was actually one of the ways in that our family kind of started to shift away from even the IDW. We started to go and chase some different pundits. Was listening to like Majid Nawaz, a lot during that time. A little more Brett Weinstein and so forth. And then that obviously shifted even more as I got to know the doctors, started reading the literature, because I literally had to figure out how to read scientific literature so I could interpret it to get an understanding, because a passion project for my family has been an injection of truth.ca, which was trying to just help Albertans understand some of the consequences that were going to be coming their way because of the jabs. And so I've been able to listen to people make their changes as they've been moving along, like as commentators, as people that entered the space, and then they're legitimately trying to navigate these new waters. So they thought one way about a particular topic, then they ran into some people, because you've even gone out of your way to bring on people that will help bring information. So I guess what I'm curious about is that context of the quantity of people that you've had to listen to, reach out for, that have offered information, and then the hard work, or I guess just the the word I guess would be vigilance. You've had to exercise a vigilance now. What has that been like for you, and who are some of the people that have helped you with that process for you to come to that place where you're feeling pretty confident in certain dynamics and you're open to that change in others?
I don't know that I am confident.
Okay.
I mean, I really, there's a great line, obviously everyone's the line of poetry by W.B. Yeats about the worst, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are filled with passionate intensity. I'm full of doubt. I don't have any certainty at all. So it's not as though, you talk about vigilance, and I suppose I'm vigilant in as much as I try to listen to as much as I can. But I also feel at the same time that broadly speaking, I'm just drowning or barely keeping afloat in a torrent of information. And I absolutely don't feel I've mastered it. I'm just aware of it. I'm aware of the enormity of what I don't know in a way that I previously had been unaware. I didn't even know enough to know what I didn't know. Now at least I have some sense of what I don't know. That's really as far as I've got. And I don't you say, who do I listen to? I don't mean this in the bad sense. I don't listen to anyone in the expectation that any one individual will tell me what I need to know. On the contrary, by this point, the furthest I've got is that I'm just interested to listen to what people are saying, especially when I you tune in. Like sometimes you're in a busy restaurant or something, and there's hubbub all around you, but you realise you're sort of inadvertently tuning in to one voice. A table way over there, but for some reason that's what you suddenly start listening to. When at the moment when people say things that I think, God, how did you arrive at that? I don't want to shut them down, and I don't want to turn them off. What I want to do is say, how did you arrive at that? Why do you think that? Because that's so far away from what I think. I can't imagine how you got to there. But it's not to say, I'm not making the assumption that they're wrong at all. I just think, wow, how did you get there? That's so fascinating that you've arrived at that conclusion, what you seem to be saying. So I mean, like you all, I started listening to podcasts years ago. I don't know when, the Joe Rogan Experience and all of the rest of it. And I was initially just fascinated because I had sort of grown up learning that people had a short attention span. I was very familiar with formatted television, documentaries, and all the rest of it. I thought I knew what the broadcasting of information looked like. And then when I stumbled across Joe Rogan in a sort of a locked off shot in a fairly uninspiring interior, and it was just 2 or 3 people talking to each other for like 3.5 hours. I thought, can it be? God, people are ready to sit and listen to these 3 strangers talk about all sorts of things for hours on end. And so that I was just fascinated to watch, to see what it was that people were watching. Why are people watching Joe Rogan? And then inadvertently I became hooked on it. And like you, I became aware of, some of his regular guests. But I am all at sea. I suppose the analogy I would say was I previously lived in a tiny little compound with high fences around it, and I could see a patch of blue sky above, and I could see what was inside my little compound, which I thought was enough that I needed to know. I've suddenly all the fences have fallen down, and I'm looking out at the wide savannah, or whatever, or I see the jungle that I'm actually within. And that's what I'm confronted with. And I don't for a moment think I understand it. And I'm at the other end of the spectrum from certainty. And the people that I find some common ground with are other people that have I can recognise an expression, as it were, on some people's faces, which is just disbelief. Confusion, that kind of, how did we get here? I can see it in some people's eyes. People stop me in the street, and I can tell instantly that they just don't know what on earth is going on or why. And I find their company the most reassuring of all, because like me, they're just filled with, uncertainty. That's what I'm looking for. Are other people that seem to have realised that it's an awful lot more complicated than any of us thought.
Mm-hmm. The complicated part, that has been definitely one of the largest revelations that I have found myself in, just with our own family's journey, and then realizing some of the responsibilities that are required of us in order to be able to take seriously what you don't know. It's kind of like this, listening to an orchestra and considering that the space between the notes is just as equally as important as the notes themselves in order for the whole thing to play out. And that's been a part of like learning the importance of the space between the notes and your involvement in knowing when to stop.
Yeah, I mean, Macy, you said as part of that you, I can't remember the form of words, but what I got from you was that you just, you don't know what you're supposed to think. You're aware of complex issues, and you don't feel ready or prepared to conceptualize it and formulate a thought about it, far less share it with other people. That's where I am, and one of the principal reasons, there are various reasons why I was, more than happy to come onto your podcast, was the fact that, I'm 59, right? And I don't know what age you are, but you're 40 years younger than me. and all things being equal, you will live into decades of the future that I just won't see. That's just in the natural order of things. And so my kids are 23 and 20 and 17. And so that future is also belongs to my kids, right? But you've got much more invested in the future than me. I mean, you've got a dog in the fight. I mean, I'm interested in the future because my children will inhabit it, but you will. And so I want to hear from the likes of you and Madison, because you're the ages that you are, and we're all looking ahead at the same uncertainty. But you've got a lot more at stake than me. Because all things being equal, you've got another 50 or 60 years, 70 years of this. Mm-hmm. And I want to see, when you look ahead, what I'm interested in hearing from you is when you look ahead, what do you think is going to happen? Because you're going to travel much further down this road than I am. I need your perspective on this.
That's funny.
I think it's funny because you mentioned the individual, and you're like, how did you arrive at that? And I think that's definitely the definition of epistemology, is like trying to understand the origins of how did a concept come into being in the first place, and where did it arrive. And I think that when I'm looking at the future, I think I'm kind of adopting the same mentality that you have, which is that I can't assume that it will go the way that I think it's going to go, or the way, like, constantly, always. I think that the thing our family was blessed to instill in my brain is that it's going to be a negotiation. And so when things move forward, I know that there is no, like, I know I take part in that negotiation. And if I don't, then someone else is going to do it on my behalf. And I don't know what their intentions are. I don't know if they'll change, as in, like you're mentioning, like they might present something at first that you like, but you don't know if that holds consistently over time. And then you need to figure out, I think for me, I need to figure out what's going to hold, hopefully, me consistently over time. Because when I was younger, it's true, like, and any age can have it, where you're like, I just don't know what to think. But I know that, like, I like what you said, which is I know that at the very least, how much I don't know. I know enough to know how much I don't know. And I think that that's where, can we try our best to look out for that? And then also something that was interesting was you said that trust does not necessarily equate to confidence. And I think that is very, very wise, because I mean, I've never put it in that light before, but that's how I feel about myself, is I don't necessarily feel confident in what's going to happen, or feel confident even in my own understanding. And I think that that's the best approach for me, is like, not necessarily a try and force yourself to be confident about this thing, but it's more like, if I know that, again, that I don't know, or I know that there's something I'm missing, or I should be the one trying to do the thought experiment of how did they arrive at that, or I just go ask, right? But the empathy of trying to understand how did they get there, I think that is good mental exercises to kind of
look forward and bridge gaps, because when I look at, as you're mentioning with the tension of the string, it's like when you're going to make a music note, you have to hold up both sides so that way it actually gets a frequency going. Otherwise, it's just a dead string. I like how even on a nation and a national level, as you were saying, and in the small relationships, our family always kind of says that when you're able to try your best to manage on the smaller level, it's going to help you to understand how we can get better on the national level. And same thing, like even listening to the geopolitical analysis that we do listen to, I'm like, oh, this plays into our individual relationships. And even as people, like, how can you think the I guess, battle of wits between nations plays into the battle of wits between individuals?
Yeah. Yeah, I one of the things I've kind of begun to learn is that I think it's people talk a lot about democracy and people governing themselves, and along with that tends to come ideas like referenda, and as though all you have to do is find out what most people want, and that's the thing to do, but. I mean, really, the majority of people are wrong about everything that's put to them most of the time. We've got into the messes that we've got into because of majorities. If there had been a referendum in Britain about forced vaccination for the unvaxxed, it would absolutely have delivered a decision that everyone was to be held down in the street and jabbed. That's what majority would have got us. And I used to, in the part of my past self, was somebody that broadly, without analysing it too much, thought, well, just if you've got 1 million people, just ask them all the same question, and if 500,001 give you one, that's the answer to go with. I just made an assumption about the rightness of being like that. But now I realise how completely wrong that was. That in reality, the important decisions and the best ideas and the changes of direction are caused by an individual or at most a few stubborn people that push against what the majority want to do. And so, when it comes, even like Albertan independence, it's so difficult to take a national issue. What is it? Is it 5 million people in Alberta? Is that right?
That's safe, yeah.
4.5. It's about the same population as Scotland, but obviously in a. Now, on the face of it, you would think, right? Let's just have a straight question: do you want to be independent or not? And the majority will get that right. That's a heck of an assumption to make. I mean, I'm not taking a stance. It's not my country. It's not my province. None of my business. But I was just looking at it and thinking, it's when you've got the well-being of 5 million people riding on one answer to one question. Very big, because I mean, at the moment, I believe in subsidiarity to some extent now, which is to say, making decisions amongst the smallest number of people possible. That meaningful democracy really can only happen at the family level, or maybe a street, or at the very most a part of a town, because the people that live on the other side of the railway tracks, how do they know what the day-to-day minutiae of your existence is? Why should they be asked the same question that's going to affect you? Do you see what I mean? It has to be on the smallest. It has to be on the smallest possible scale. That's one of the many things that I've become aware of or started thinking about that I never used to think about.
That was one of the wake-up calls, because in our lovely Canadian education system, we are taught about how lovely democracy is and how democracy is always the way to go. And the one thing about starting listening to all the podcasts, realizing, as Mason, you alluded to, how much we don't know, that's when education became one of my top priorities, because just as the founding fathers of the United States had said, democracy, Republican. You don't get a republic or a democracy without an educated populace and an active populace. The reality is we have so many people, especially on the local level. We've only recently started realizing how local it can get, your municipality, city level versus, your provincial politics and then federal. Our family definitely believes the smaller you go, the more handle you actually have, because then you get to put your own intentions and attention onto it versus, as you alluded to, the small little oligarch that likes to put their intentions at the top level because they already have the resources, they have the history, they got the context, they got the relationships. Well, we have the relationships on the local level. We know our town, we know our neighbors, they don't. And that's why it's definitely something that we can have more power over. And when it comes to democracy, unless you have an educated populace, that's one thing Macy and I were thinking about, because the libertarian point of view is, everybody can do their thing so long as you don't harm another individual. And so even with the bioweapons, it's like, well, people should have the choice to be able to harm themselves. It's like, okay, sure, except they don't know they're harming themselves. There is no informed consent. There's no information. People don't know it. And so how can you argue for democracy if you aren't educating your populace? And with the Alberta independence movement, kind of where it started for our family anyway, was the Alberta Prosperity Project. And what we liked about them was that they were an educational platform because they realized the same thing Ben Franklin realized. Ben Franklin spent 20 years just trying to get people to think about freedom and virtue. Just think about it. Before he started talking about any sort of republic or independence, a declaration, none of that. He was just traveling and then writing in the newspapers, trying to get people to think about a different perspective. And that's how independence also has to go and has to start, is you have to have an educated populace. So you need to have them thinking about how to run a nation, let alone actually just having a referendum, because I completely concur. Even independence, one of our biggest cautions to Albertans has been, it doesn't matter if that referendum vote is a yes if you don't know where we're going. If you don't have an idea, then what's the point?
When you talk about education, I mean, it's it's a rhetorical question that I'm about to ask. Really, I'm not really asking you. What I mean is this: what I think. I'm not even sure what education means. We talk about, you're talking about it, I talk about it, we talk about yes, you think, well, can you ask a population to make serious decisions about serious issues if they're not educated? So, but the thing is, what do we mean by educated? Because I grew up and I've seen it with my own kids at school. It's become increasingly about a curriculum. There's a curriculum that gets put together and every kid is given it. Someone somewhere, or some star chamber somewhere, presumably sits and decides what the kids are to be told. And that, we call that, in this country, my country, Scotland, we call that education. They're all taught the same thing about whatever, about slavery, or about the Russian Revolution, or about the American Revolutionary War. They all get taught the same thing, and then they're expected to write basically the same essay, which is to regurgitate what they've listened to and give it back verbatim and faultlessly. Excellent, you're educated. So, before we can talk about an educated population, we've got to have some sort of conversation about what we even mean by educated. Educo means to lead out. It means to draw out from within. So that a teacher is supposed to draw out from each individual pupil what is innate in them and bring it forth. That said, arguably that's what education means, but that's not what we do here in my country. We just shove things like making foie gras patty. We just open the goose's mouth and shove a funnel in and pump grain into it until the thing bursts.
I think for me,
there's so many conversations we've got to have before we can have conversations about anything at all.
That was such a cordial rebuke. That was a beautiful rebuke.
Well, it's funny. Yeah,
I don't mean it. I don't mean it as a rebuke. I don't mean that. I mean, I don't know either what I mean by education. I mean, I say things like, we need an educated population before we can do X, Y, and Z. But then I realised that I don't even know what I mean by educated. I don't know what I mean. It's just a word. I'm just saying educated. But what I don't know. So I'm certainly not expecting you to come straight back at me with an answer about what I don't know. It's not a criticism.
You're so cordial. You are overly cordial. We love you.
I was gonna say
No,
that.
it's sincere. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I went through school like you're going through school, and then I got 4 years of university education, and for the longest time I considered myself to be quite well educated. I don't think that at all now.
Yeah.
I don't actually back now, and I don't actually know what happened to me when I was at school and university. I'm even further away from knowing what the intentions were of the people who educated me. What was their end game? What were they trying to achieve?
You were UNESCO'd.
Almost certainly.
Well, it's funny because you said it was rhetorical, but I was like, oh, I feel like I'm like, because as you said, we have a bit more like of a, what is it? Something in the game. There is an actual saying of
Skin
it.
in the
Skin
game.
in the game. Thank
Skin
you.
in the game.
We have a bit more skin in the game of how the process moves forward. And I gladly accept the responsibility for that. That's the key difference, I think, for I guess me and Maddie is our generation. It's whether or not they actually decide they want to take on that fight. But for me, when I'm thinking of like education, I'm just thinking that you do know the answer because you've already said it in this podcast. Is like you said, you pay attention to what is happening. And so when I'm thinking of like and the different perspectives, like and trying to figure out how they arrive there, that I think to me is where the education comes is more like when you're presented something, even in our curriculum and in school and our education system thus far, it's safe to assume that for Dad's generation as well as my own, there's some differences, but really truly it's a lot of regurgitation of very much the same things. But the difference is when even when I was in school, and again, granted, I wasn't as, I guess, more educated as I am now, but I think the principle of trying to understand, okay, if this is like the theory I'm given, right, it can be applied to the same principle you were talking about when it comes to people, is that consistent forever? And it's probably a no. So when we're thinking about science, for example, it's one of those, like we're presented as if it's fact, right? But we're not presented as if it's actually just a theory. And there's some evidence that can go with it, but then we're never presented with, well, what question were they actually solving as opposed to what they say they were solving, right? Through what was happening. And so when I'm looking at even sort of the lessons that I was learning in social studies or whatever, right? As you said, it's one of those, well, can you recognize when there's like some truth? And how does that, like, if it's true, how does it show within reality as in this, this is the case to be true? And also, is it also not true? Because it's almost like there's something about the narrative that they give us where, again, like we have the 4-to-1 rule, which is it can both be true and not true at the same time. There's aspects of it that do hold within reality, because otherwise, if it was completely like just out the window, then some people might be able to recognize and go like, well, that makes no sense. But they do grab onto a part of us that is like, oh, I can see how that does play. But then the other unfortunate side of it is that then you don't span it out to go like, well, whose intention is it to have me think this way? And then that goes into what you were saying, which is, well, what's your intention with that knowledge? Like figuring out, well, what do I do with this? And then that goes into figuring out, well, what are some of the values that you have? And it doesn't mean you need to like draw a fine line in the sand to like negate other people. If anything, it's like when you think of a country and it has its constitution, right? And it has a list of its principles that it's wanting to adhere to. Well, what's your constitution? And it doesn't mean that you like are rigid. It means, does your constitution allow for other models to come in? As in, it's my constitution to make sure that I keep that openness. I make sure that I pay attention to what I don't know. And then I think that plays into trying to education is that negotiation. And as you said, a bringing forward of something that is natural and organic and starts to arise. Well, children, they get so, I guess, fascinated with everything. And so as the teacher, it's their job to guide the child that's looking at the pretty flowers to say, hey, look at those a little bit longer before you go on to the next thing, right? Like, acknowledge the beauty about it. Why are you looking at it? Like, what about it is fascinating to you? And then what do you want to do with that? You could choose to just appreciate beauty and move on, like, right? And then the next thing is, okay, they go towards something like maybe they see a sport that they like and they're like, oh, I love playing with the other kids, and it's just bringing forward a natural playfulness in them. And then you start to see what it is that they learn and come of that. And so I think that it's just, when I'm thinking of that education, it's the same thing as the natural curiosity that human beings has unfortunately has been stifled. And I think that is part of the process of educating yourself, is what does it look like when you're stifled? And that's, if anything, that's why the school system, we can in many ways not thank it for some of the I guess, hidden agendas hidden within it. But when I was in it, I've never, after the whole process was done, I cried because I was like, wow, that took 13 years of my life away. But at the same time, it's like, well, I learned what it was like to have something taken away. And I learned what it was like to be a stifled individual. And I was like, whoa, I don't want that to happen again. Like how you were saying, I don't want to feel like I'm going to
be let down
and disappointed again. And I think that that's equally as important in the process of educating yourself.
Now, the physicist Niels Bohr said, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's like, he said that the opposite of a factual statement is a false statement, but the opposite of a profound truth might be another profound truth.
Yeah.
I don't really need to follow that up, do I? I mean, that's a brilliant insight. You know, so just because I might think that I'm in possession of a profound truth, when I hear somebody else that say something to me that is, where did you come up with that? It's too easy to think either I'm right and you're wrong, or maybe they're right, and in a more kind of humble person, I suppose, no, they're actually right and I'm wrong. But the reality might be that you're both right. You see, it's you know, it's so like, the more I think about everything, the more confused I become. You know, but to the extent that I think being permanently in that state is right. You know, because otherwise you're not moving. You know, if you become comfortable in what it is that you know, and you think, oh, I know enough now, I've got it now. That's probably when you stop swimming and sink beneath the surface. You know, that chaos of sort of treading water. At least you're doing, you know, at least you're trying to stay on the surface.
Yeah. Yeah, my dad always says, do something, even if it's wrong.
Well, it's funny because I was thinking of the dad once said this to me, and it was, oh, I never realized it. But it's funny when we're talking about the, I guess, opposites of opinion. Like, yeah, we keep alluding to your restaurant reference, but it's a good reference. And you're thinking of the left and the right and all of that. I think that me and Maddie, we had a interview with two other young individuals, a young couple. Check it out on our channel. But they were alluding to the fact that the two-party system, I was asking them, what do you think about that? Because I think that youth especially are seeing in some regards that, you know, politics is, you know, icky. You don't want to touch it. The two-party dynamic, it's false. There's something wrong with the contradictions within them, and so they don't want to touch it, because when you're younger, you don't want to contradict yourself. And funny enough is when you're trying to avoid it, sometimes you're getting further enmeshed into contradicting yourself. And then, so when we were talking about it, it was more like Sebastian, the young man, he said that, well, I mean, the country, I guess, was built on the fact that there's opposing perspectives, right? And so we can't, as we're this theme of like, you can't eliminate the tension, but at the same time, there was a certain core value that at the very least they both shared at a certain time, and that core value seems to not be, I guess, sort of, it seems so opposite to them, and at least in the way that they described it, it feels like now it's so opposite that it's very hard to tell what it is that we're supposed to do, and where the common ground is. But I think that it was funny when Dad said that when you go further like communist, right, on the extreme, or you go fascist on the extreme, eventually they come to be the exact same result and the exact same thing, and then you could call that totalitarianism, right? Because at the end of the day, it's what does it look like, and where is it going? And I think that like if you go too far on either of the other ends. And so I guess I'm like still trying to formulate the question because I don't have necessarily the answer. But when I'm thinking of the like left and right, and if you go too far, you become the same thing. I think that that's the thing that people have to be aware of themselves, is that they could be staring at a mirror, right? If they're not paying attention to the fact that these core values, it's like, okay, well, if you say that you want to, like the left says that they want to be treating people equally and, with respect and dignity, it's like, well, are they actually, and like in what way, and only to the people that you agree with? And the same thing has to be asked of the right leaning. And then even then, when we were in that conversation, it was the over time, what the, I guess, conservatives or Republicans or Democrats or liberals or whatever your two party is, over time you'll see that they aren't what they are now, right? Like they had to go through an ebb and flow. And I was noticing that even with my my journey as well, as like I think it does go beyond the labels, because again, you're a moving entity if you choose to be. And so, and you allow life to teach you some certain lessons. But I was learning that, like even our propensity to now be mistrusting, as you were saying, of, I don't know if I necessarily trust the government. That was once considered, a left-leaning perspective, because it was like, large corporation, don't trust, right? And even to like, me and Maddie were speaking at a conference once, or like a little mini gathering, actually, I shouldn't say conference, but there were some hecklers in the background that supposedly seemed in opposition of the Alberta independence narrative. And during the presentation, the individual that invited us to speak with him, he's talking about how I think it was abortions of some sort agenda, where our money would go overseas to, I guess, fund what his version of like abortion type of programs, even though on face value they don't label it as that. But to him, he's like, if I was reading between the lines, this is what I see. And then they were getting really upset. And I looked at them, I'm like, that might be money laundering, of which you and I both don't like. And then boom, they were quiet, because there is something where, no, both sides, they actually are recognizing something. It's just they're having, they think that we're so opposite that there's not like a way to come together. And I think that's what, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the party system, I mean, you're talking about two-party. The party system is the death of democracy anyway. I mean, for me, the one of the blackest days of, or milestones in British history is the so-called Bill of Rights of 1680, 89, can't remember the date. Because out of that, the Bill of Rights, amongst other things, enshrined the primacy of Parliament. The sovereignty, in fact, of Parliament. This was in the aftermath of English Civil War and all of the rest of it. And the Bill of Rights enshrined that Parliament was sovereign. That's only the individual is sovereign, as far as I'm concerned. And because of that idea of Parliament being sovereign, inevitably we ended up with a party system out of that. And by now in Britain, in the supposed mother of democracies, there is no democracy. There possibly hasn't ever been any democracy anyway. It may always and only have been an illusion. But there's no democracy because it's the party. It's the majority party. And within the dominant party, it's the cabinet. You know, we've now got this abomination since the early 20th century of the cabinet, which is a secretive group within the party that makes all the decisions. So, you know, Britain's run by a cabinet. It's totalitarian. You know, there is no democracy. So, and the existence of parties at all, it should be anathema to anyone that's interested in democracy.
It's manufactured consent, as Noam Chomsky talks about when he gives that quote, right? They're keeping you in between these uprights that still promote the system. The system ends up being what dictates our lives.
It should only be, you know, each constituency or whatever should elect a member of parliament, and the choice, you know, and no one should be able to govern who those potential MPs are. You know, anyone should be able to stand potentially as the representative of a constituency, and then that person is sent only to be the mouthpiece of the people that elected them. You know, we've got this ridiculous thing culturally within the British political system where MPs are encouraged to say, well, I don't just represent my constituency. That's not really what I'm here for, which is just another way of saying that they're in service to the party of the machinery that puts them into power. So we don't have any democracy in Britain. We don't have anything like it. And this idea that you choose between two parties is absolute nonsense, because as we've all learned over the last few years, it's a uniparty anyway. Mm-hmm. You know, as they say in the United States of America, you know, whoever you vote for, you get John McCain, which is a very useful metaphor for the situation that we're all in all the time. That really, I mean, in Britain at the moment, right, we've got the government of the day, a Labour government is doing away with trial by jury. Right, after 800 years, they are doing away with the right to trial by jury. And it's trial by jury that is the only possible manifestation of democracy, if by democracy you mean people governing themselves. Because the genius of the way in which trial by jury was summoned into being thousands of years ago, really, was that you bring together 12 people traditionally in England, or 15 people in Scotland, and you invite them not just to judge the guilt or innocence of the accused, but really more importantly, to judge the justice of the legislation under which they've been brought in front of the court in the first place. So as well as deciding whether or not you think that person did that, the jury looks at the legislation and says that shouldn't be legislation anyway. And apart from that, for any, we are finding this person innocent because they should never have been brought in on the basis of that legislation. That legislation is flawed. And as long as you have that, you've got democracy. If you don't have that, if you've got a situation, which is what we're stepping into now in Britain, where a government writes legislation and then decides on the guilt or innocence of a person in relation to it, that's textbook totalitarianism. They get to say it's against the law to wear green trousers on a Friday, okay? And then they find somebody in the street wearing green trousers on a Friday, and they take them into court, and they say, well, there's the CCTV footage, that's you wearing green trousers on a Friday, you're guilty, and you get 10 years in prison for that. Whereas in the context of trial by jury, a jury would have been able to say, yeah, well, I can see on the CCTV that he is indeed wearing green trousers on a Friday, but that's a ridiculous law.
Right.
So he goes home to his family, and that law goes in the bin. Don't be ridiculous. And so it's by that mechanism, and only that mechanism, that the people decide whether or not they're going to live under those laws. Mm-hmm. And if they don't like those laws, they throw them out. And that's done on behalf of the whole population by 12 people in one room at any one moment. And most amazingly of all, we've already got the tyranny of majority verdict. There's that terrible word again, where it's a majority decision decides the guilt or innocence of the accused. That was never supposed to be the way. In real, originally instituted trial by jury, if 11 people said guilty and one person said innocent, the verdict of the jury was innocent, because true trial by jury honours the sovereignty of the individual, the principle that the one is right and the majority is not. It doesn't need to be the majority. The verdict of that jury was innocent, and it's inherent in the trial by jury system that has now been thrown in the bin by a bunch of here today, gone tomorrow politicians that fancy themselves as dictators. That any vestige of the illusion of democracy has been thrown out of Britain. Not only is it demonstrably not there anyway, but they've underlined the fact by throwing out the very idea of trial by jury. That's where we are in Britain.
Well, that's where they were in the United States.
And that's where we are in Canada.
Yeah, we're in the same boat because they're getting ready to do the same things here, Neil. And the thing is like I was reading over the Declaration of Independence, and they actually brought up several different facts that they wanted to lay the case for before everyone was becoming signatories to it. And having their jury rights taken away was one of their grievances. So this isn't like the first time that this has happened. This is something that helped spur the radicalism of your Patrick Henrys and your Benjamin Franklins, your James Madisons, and not to mention legislating you into criminality. That was also one of the things that they were one of their grievances. So this is we've come full circle.
As you were talking, I was thinking of the trucker convoy, because when we were thinking of, I guess, even so for us, it's UCP and then NDP or Liberal. We kind of conflate the two. But when I'm thinking of it, I'm like, during the time of the COVID debacle with Jason Kenney was our UCP representative, and he was in putting forth all the mandates. It was the trucker convoy and all the people that were affiliated with that were like, we need to get this person out of here because what it is that they're doing is not right. And it reminds me of how when me and Maddie kind of engage with some of the UCP pendants that we engage with, especially the younger people and even the older people, but I think that the older people that have been in the game a long time they know better. And so they're just placating to grooming is kind of how I see it. But they do a kind of, instead of guilt by association, it's like an innocence by association. And they look at just because they're under this party banner means that they they do the assumption that you have, which is they think the way I think because this little piece of paper, this little party label said that's what they're supposed to, that's what they do. And that's not necessarily true, because we saw that like with someone labeled that Kenny, he still put forward the mandates and did everything that you're talking about. Like, it's very totalitarian. It's a dumb law. We can wear green trousers on a Friday. Like, what are we talking about? And then that's when it came forward where the people were like, no, now we get to decide that. And I think that plays even into what's going on in Ireland, if we also want to transition to speak about that as well. But that's I think would be my last little comment, is that you, or at least my generation, maybe mistakenly the older generations as well, is you look at this, you don't look at the individuals of these so-called parties. You just look at the little, I guess, transcript that says, well, this party believes in this, so that means everybody in it believes the exact same thing and believes that we should go at it the exact same way that you think you. But if you're not engaged and you're not kind of putting your pressing against these people specifically, knowing them, shaking their hand, looking in their eyes, noticing the things that you're noticing, which is, do you have an ability to say, I don't know? As in, like, looking for those people that you said is important to you, which is, oh, they're understanding it's much bigger than they expected. Well, do your politicians, do they have that look in their eye? Are you even pressing for that? You know what I mean? So we can now go into that if you want.
I'm just thinking, the labeling, you say about, assuming because someone's the same political persuasion as you that you can make some sort of assumption that you can agree with them. That kind of that's another of the basic axioms that I've kind of built up for myself, is that I don't trust any labels at all. I'm not interested in them. So it doesn't mean anything to me if you come to me and say that you're Labour or Conservative or you're right or left. It doesn't mean anything. In the same way that you'd be invited up, people are invited to think, well, if I'm a Christian, then every Christian's a good person. Mm-hmm. All they have to do, the secret word, the password to get into my into my secret garden is just say you're a Christian. Oh yeah, then you're the same as me, or Muslim, or Jewish, or Zoroastrian, or Scientologist, or whatever. One of the things of COVID, I realised that I kind of broadly thought that the people living around me, my neighbours, and everybody else, we're all living in the same place. We're kind of dealing with the same circumstances in a lot of ways in day to day. So I've probably, got things in common with you. And then the COVID debacle happened, and everybody around here thought differently than I did. We did. My wife and I did. We ended up in a club of two, surrounded by everybody else. And yet, when I went online, I had to go online to find people tens of thousands, 10,000 miles away that were the same as me. So it didn't matter that my neighbours were, lived in Stirling, were Scottish, had broadly had the same education as me, went to the same shops as me, had their kids in the same schools as me, therefore I must be the same as them. Double down, not at all. We were living in the same place, same postcode, walked the same streets, went to the same shops, kids at the same schools, had nothing in common when it came right down to it. Well, and that was such a lesson. That was such a lesson for me. I had to go and I found common ground with people 10,000 miles away, speaking a different language, different colour of skin, different religion, whatever. But notionally, a different political ideology. Not that I ever had one. But then, regardless of all of those labels that I might have applied to them, I've got more in common with you there, with your background, than I have with the people living next door.
Yeah, that was one thing that's kind of our family, talking about democracy. We joke that, our mom is the dictator, but there is a part truth to it, because we operate as a little, traditional jury, because we don't do tyranny of majority in this household. It's like, okay, each person gets their say, even throughout COVID, I try to remind people that my whole family had different perspectives. There were so many arguments between, me and my mom, because we had different fears at the time. We had different concerns. So all of us had to negotiate about how to go out and how to demonstrate ourselves, and then how to still respect one another on the day-to-day, even though we had very different opposing ideas of how to physically act. So in our household, we have that same mentality of regarding what democracy really looks like, operating in a family of now 7. And then even with the labels, Dad said from an early on age, he tried to get rid of the father, daughter, wife, and not in the sense of those don't hold value, because they do hold value, but in the sense of understanding it was a way for him to transcend and treat us as individuals, not looking at your kid as, oh, they're supposed to listen to me, I have this authority, I know better. You alluded to earlier how you wanted to get me and Macy's perspective, because we have a stake in the game. But what's interesting is that me and Macy still look for your perspective and our dad's perspective.
Yeah, well, that's okay. That's okay. We're just looking at each other.
Well, exactly.
And without making assumptions about that person is dad or the king or mum, and therefore they've got some kind of innate rightness about them.
No,
you can respect, and you can have all of those right, those right thinking ways. But if you just expect any one individual to be right about everything all of the time, you're being ridiculous.
Yes, and
in the same way that they would be ridiculous to think that they are right about everything all of the time.
Right?
It's just too onerous a burden to put on any one individual to expect them to be right.
It's a lot of work. I didn't even want to put it on myself as a dad. Like, I didn't want to own that in that regards. I wanted to actually dispel the myth that I was correct
Guys,
as early as possible.
I'm watching the clock here, and believe it or not,
yeah.
and I don't mind your listeners knowing this. I have got to take my dog out because no, I'll tell you why. Because where we are, it's a big Irish wolfhound, and we take her to a field where she's contained, and you have to book a slot. And my slot to take my dog for her walk is upon me, and so.
Yeah.
For that reason only, I have to listen to and respect as a sovereign individual my 5-year-old Irish wolfhound Jessie, whose opinions and points of view I make room for.
All right, well, where can people find you, Neil, before we let you go? And thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I must say, the first thing I want to say is have me on again. I've been more than happy to come back and talk to you, because we've barely scratched the surface here.
Yeah, I was going to say we could have kept going.
Even if we talked for another 5 hours. So just, by all means, just, let's book another slot and get together and, and pick up with a lot of this conversation and see what's happened by the time we talk together again. But you say, where can people find me? I've got a channel on YouTube. I've got a Patreon presence. If you go to patreon.com, you'll find me there. I write books, all available online or wherever you buy your books. My handle on X is the Coast Guy. But yeah, you'll find me. It should be easy enough to find me. If you put in a search, you'll find all sorts of things about me. Some of them true, some of them less true.
Well, thank you very much, Neil, for coming on. Enjoy taking your dog out, and we look forward to seeing you again. We plan on doing it for sure.
Jessie thanks you from the bottom of the Irish Wolfhound heart. All right. Lots of love to you, and thanks for having me, and lots of love to your listeners as well.
Aww.
We'll speak again soon, I hope.
Yes.
Yes.
Mwah.